Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the Emerging Trends in Business. In this episode, I discuss how COVID-19 transformed the marketplace into a digital landscape. In years to come, 2020 will be remembered as the year that transformed everything. Nowhere else have there been such remarkable and unexpected developments as in the digital and e-commerce sectors, which have exploded in the aftermath of COVID-19. This episode examines how COVID-19 hastened the spread of e-commerce toward new enterprises, customers, and product categories, implying a long-term shift in e-commerce transactions away from luxury goods and services and toward standard necessities. It also focuses on how policymakers may use the promise of the digital revolution in retail and related sectors to help corporate adaptability and increase social distance while ensuring that no one is left behind. Demand has shifted away from traditional retail and toward e-commerce. However, the demand has shifted away from traditional retail and toward e-commerce. In response to the COVID-19 crisis, several OECD nations have considerably reduced physical contact. Self-imposed social isolation to avoid disease, along with tight confinement measures established in several OECD nations, has effectively halted a significant portion of traditional brick-and-mortar retail, at least temporarily. Retail and food service sales in the United States fell 7.7% between February and April 2020 compared to the same period in 2019. However, sales at food shops and non-store merchants, mostly e-commerce providers, grew by 16% and 14.8%, respectively. In the EU 272, retail sales via mail-order houses or the Internet climbed by 30% in April 2020 compared to April 2019. But total retail sales fell by 17.9%. The ensuing transitions in retail from brick and mortar to e-commerce are anticipated to be considerable across countries. In the United States, for example, whereas the percentage of e-commerce in total retail climbed steadily between the first and second quarters of 2020, from 9.6% to 11.8%, it jumped to 16.1% between the first and second quarters of 2020. The trend is similar in the United Kingdom, where the percentage of e-commerce in retail increased from 17.3% to 20.3% between the first and second quarters of 2020 before increasing dramatically to 31.3% between the first and second quarters of 2020. Similar increases may be seen in other places, such as China, where the percentage of online retail in total accumulated retail sales between January and August 2020 reached 24.6%. Up from 19.4% in August 2019 and 17.3% in August 2018. The spike happened later in Europe and North America, namely when numerous OECD nations followed Italy's example and implemented confinement measures within a short period of each other. The fact that Google searches for delivery choices nearly quadrupled in several countries before real restraint measures were implemented, for example in Germany or the United Kingdom, demonstrates the close link between consumer expectations, government action, and behavioral change. The boom in e-commerce has not benefited all online businesses and product categories. It's important to note, however, that the boom in e-commerce has not benefited all online businesses and product categories. The impact of the COVID-19 issue on e-commerce varies by product category and vendor. In the United States, for example, demand for things connected to personal safety, such as disposable gloves, home activities, groceries, or ICT equipment, increased, whereas demand for items related to travel, sports, or formal clothes, such as luggage, bridal apparel, gym bags decreased. Several nations have seen a shift toward e-commerce, particularly along the food supply chain, with farmers employing digital technology to sell their goods directly to consumers or restaurants switching to providing food or grocery delivery services. In Germany, online sales of medications and groceries, which have typically been lagging industries in terms of e-commerce, increased dramatically. However, online sales decreased by roughly 18% in March 2020 compared to the previous year. In Korea, where official data is available, the value of e-commerce transactions increased by 15.8% between July 2019 and July 2020. Food services, 66.3%, domestic products, 48%, and food and drinks, 46.7%, saw considerable increases. However, Online transactions involving cultural and leisure services or trip planning and transportation services fell significantly, by 67.8% and 51.6%, respectively. Food items were the single greatest winner in e-commerce in China, with a 36% rise in aggregate sales from January to April 2020 compared to the previous year. In contrast, total internet sales from January to April 2020 were nearly unchanged, plus 1.7%, compared to the same time in 2019, after growing considerably, 17.8%, in 2018-19. Clothing sales fell by 16% in 2019 compared to 2018, following a period of a substantial increase of 23.7%. For example, senior customers who began to engage in e-commerce to increase physical distance may continue to adhere to their newly acquired habits during the current crisis. According to the credit card usage of almost 10 million Japanese credit card holders, the growth in the percentage of online purchases in credit card transactions was greatest for users in their 60s, from 15.4% in January to 21.9% in March 2020, and those in their 70s, from 10.9% to 16.4%. According to a McKinsey Global Consumer Survey measuring the adoption of digital and low-touch activities during the COVID-19 crisis, users who had never engaged in these activities before drove more than 50% of the increase in online grocery shopping. As a direct response to COVID-19, 21% of individuals in the United States report ordering groceries online or through an app from a local retailer. In Brazil, around 54% of internet users purchased food or food items online in 2020, up from only 22% in 2018. Cosmetics, toiletries, and pharmaceuticals all saw significant price rises. Because convenience has always been a primary driver of e-commerce participation, many new users will probably continue to buy at least some things online. Others may continue to purchase online in the face of a pandemic or because merchants can keep customers through loyalty programs or subscription models established. On the supply side, many brick-and-mortar store owners, frequently forced to close their physical storefronts, view e-commerce as a potentially critical complementary or alternative sales channel. Because the transition to online sales necessitates an investment, many enterprises that increase their e-commerce involvement during the COVID-19 crisis have the incentive to capitalize on their new infrastructure or capabilities in the long term. This is especially true for more prominent merchants that have invested in their sales and delivery infrastructure. For example, by April 12, 2020, Amazon's supermarket subsidiary Whole Foods Market has boosted online order capacity by more than 60% to match the rise in demand, increasing pickup services from about 80 outlets to more than 150, with more extensions possible in the future. Even smaller merchants, many of whom have avoided more considerable investments by depending on the infrastructure and services offered by online platforms, such as fulfillment, shipping, and customer support, may opt to convert their established online name and expertise into a long-term asset. A similar case can be made for several other players, many of which are just now laying the groundwork for an online sales infrastructure due to regulatory relaxation. This includes cafes, restaurants, museums, and public swimming pools, which in certain countries are compelled to implement an online booking system to regulate the number of people on their premises at any given time. Policymakers must guarantee that e-commerce serves everyone, now more than ever. What's more, policymakers must guarantee that e-commerce serves everyone, now more than ever. As previously stated, the COVID-19 problem spurred the spread of e-commerce to new enterprises, clients, and product categories. Individuals may avoid physical distance while still accessing the whole product range, thanks to e-commerce. While many consumer groups used to associate e-commerce with high-tech items, toys, or books, it now increasingly includes commodities for which availability is vital to a vast portion of the population, such as food, medication, and other needs. E-commerce has also allowed for continuing access, either online or in person, to particular sectors of public life, such as concerts, museums, or swimming pools, by effectively assigning time-stamped tickets to minimize overcrowding. Similarly, e-commerce is now a critical alternative or supplementary sales approach for many businesses, allowing them to continue operations in the face of contact limits and other constraints. As a result, bridging lingering digital barriers has become increasingly vital. These can be connected to issues such as access, income, awareness, or skills for customers. For example, the elderly, a demographic category that might benefit significantly from e-commerce-enabled physical distance, have consistently lagged in e-commerce participation in numerous nations. Significant and persistent inequalities also continue for low-income households or people with little education, which is troubling considering the dropping prices of connections, the pervasiveness of digital technology, and the expanding range of online items. Aside from bridging these gaps, governments must also guarantee that consumer firms, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, continue to face persistent disparities in e-commerce participation, SMEs. In 2017, the proportion of SMEs participating in e-commerce was less than half that of large enterprises in most OECD nations. This explains and contributes to S.M.E.'s lack of resilience and flexibility in dealing with the expenses of lower demand and local control measures. Low levels of digitization and issues in accessing and integrating new technologies make it especially difficult for such businesses to modify existing work procedures, such as by adding teleworking or an e-commerce sales channel. Many of these divisions have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 problem. Furthermore, regulatory uncertainty regarding which laws to follow, e.g., offline or online, might suddenly influence many enterprises attempting to integrate and move between offline, online, and omni-channel sales channels. While many of these issues existed before the COVID-19 crisis, the present scenario has highlighted the necessity for governmental intervention. During the COVID-19 crisis, some governments took steps to assist the digitalization of business models. Although difficulties remain severe in many countries, particularly the most disadvantaged, they are adequately safeguarded against unfair, deceptive, and fraudulent commercial internet practices, which have increased in the present crisis. Bridging digital boundaries among individuals and encouraging vulnerable people to participate. Furthermore, bridging digital boundaries among individuals and encouraging vulnerable people to participate is critical. Factors that prevent specific groups of people from participating in e-commerce are frequently tied to economic and social situations that extend well beyond e-commerce, such as rural-urban divides, wealth inequality, uneven access to education, and an aging population. These circumstances can appear as inadequate connection, a lack of digital skills, low levels of trust, including security and privacy concerns, or a lack of access to online payment systems, all of which can be addressed by governmental action. Relevant strategies in this respect include targeted information campaigns, trust-building programs, adult education, and public-private partnerships that encourage low-income and rural households to participate. During the COVID-19 crisis, governments and corporations in numerous countries, including Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States, announced plans to lower the financial burden associated with internet access for specific consumer categories, such as the poor or young. Mobile money, e.g., M-Pesa in Kenya, cash on delivery, deliveries through mom-and-pop stores in remote areas, or the use of landline phones and social media to coordinate online orders for those with limited digital skills or access to digital tools are all examples of innovative approaches to addressing lingering digital divides in developing and emerging countries. Related tactics should be examined in OECD nations to develop community-based delivery programs for particularly vulnerable customers, e.g., those in public care homes, and consumers who lack the necessary skills to participate in e-commerce. Targeted interventions may be required, especially for disadvantaged populations, in the context of grocery shopping, a necessary activity with a high contact likelihood. The first wave of the COVID-19 problem demonstrated that obtaining a delivery slot or waiting waits of many weeks discouraged seniors with access to digital technology from utilizing these tools for grocery shopping. Some grocery stores have responded by reserving online grocery delivery slots for elderly and vulnerable customers or encouraging non-vulnerable customers to buy in-store to free up capacity for the vulnerable, for example Waitrose, Tesco, and Whole Foods. Governments can actively participate in this process. During COVID-19, Ireland's Citizens Advice Board gives information on safer shopping and expressly advises non-vulnerable individuals to purchase in-store or pick up online orders at the merchant to avoid occupying delivery slots that may be utilized by vulnerable persons. Many nations have also made the opening of establishments contingent on reserving certain shopping hours for vulnerable populations, a practice that may be expanded to home delivery. In some circumstances, it may be required to regulate how grocery shops identify vulnerable customers in the context of online purchasing, as present procedures are frequently ad hoc and varied, for example, based on loyalty programs and user accounts. Furthermore, even mainstream customers typically become more financially and psychologically vulnerable during a crisis. Governments may need to create trust, participate in discourse with internet enterprises about ethical business practices, educate consumers about potential frauds, and resist pulling back consumer protection and product safety laws. Governments should also maintain enough retail competition, given that the COVID-19 issue may cause many small and local brick-and-mortar businesses to quit, strengthening market consolidation to benefit bigger merchants with online sales channels. Developing creative e-commerce business concepts and promoting digital transformation in SMEs. Moreover, developing creative e-commerce business concepts and promoting digital transformation in SMEs is important. As the digital transition advances, new business models emerge in unpredictable ways that challenge existing policy frameworks. Regulatory regimes, in particular, may maintain artificial differences between online and physical commerce, even as enterprises increasingly explore business models that include both features. Planning and zoning regulations can also hinder the quick conversion of existing brick-and-mortar businesses, e.g., converting storefronts into warehouses or logistics hubs in urban centers. They can also prohibit or slow the introduction of novel, contact-free delivery techniques like drones or robots. This is especially important during the COVID-19 crisis when enterprises must adjust to physical interaction constraints or supply chain interruptions by incorporating new business activities and logistical solutions to preserve their economic survival. To the greatest extent practicable, regulatory responses to emerging e-commerce business models should allow for experimentation while remaining transparent and adaptable. In a number of countries, regulatory flexibility has been observed in response to the COVID-19 crisis, such as the relaxation of contactless payment caps or temporary exceptions to planning and zoning rules, such as allowing restaurants to increase their terrace space and creating additional bike lanes, as in Paris. Governments should consider similar flexibility in the context of e-commerce, for example, by relying on adequately monitored and evaluated experimental regulatory waivers, such as regulatory sandboxes, which have been successfully used to test new technologies such as drones and digital payment mechanisms. Governments might also eliminate ambiguity for enterprises, for example, regarding the omnichannel business models regulations, by giving clear information about the existing rules and their consequences for specific business models. For example, the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry have issued interpretative guidelines on electronic commerce and information property trading since 2002, a useful practice that might assist enterprises in altering their business models in response to the COVID-19 situation. Several governments have also taken focused initiatives to help brick-and-mortar stores in their digital transition and to combat the economic ramifications of the COVID-19 dilemma. Japan, for example, has a business continuity subsidy to assist enterprises in diversifying and expanding their sales channels. Through a specific assistance program, Korea also encouraged brick-and-mortar stores to open their doors online. In this context, several governments have expressly recognized the importance of online platforms, which may help ease the transition from offline to online sales by providing various services such as logistics, fulfillment, and customer support. For example, China and Singapore aggressively assisted MSMEs in gaining access to regional or global e-commerce platforms to decrease costs or sell internationally via digital methods. Role of policymakers in creating a favorable climate for e-commerce. Additionally, the role of policymakers in creating a favorable climate for e-commerce is essential. Policymakers should continue developing an enabling environment for online transactions in areas such as digital connection, logistics and trade, and digital products and services to maintain an efficient e-commerce landscape that delivers for everyone. Postal services, for example, are a sector that directly influences e-commerce. While logistics and postal services have been slowed in many countries due to new COVID-19 related safety guidelines and government recommendations, the fact that they were considered critical sectors by many governments has contributed to their continued operation as crucial enablers of e-commerce on the supply side. Furthermore, service providers have responded by promoting contactless delivery solutions in several nations, such as package lockers, or by substituting signatures with alternative proofs of delivery. Governments can actively support such alternatives. For example, Italy is contemplating several initiatives to stimulate automated parcel lockers, such as expanding the coverage of parcel locker networks or supporting more efficient locker usage, such as enhanced interoperability or sharing between different suppliers. Key recommendations. Finally, key recommendations include reducing digital inequalities among individuals. Policymakers must increase affordable and high-quality internet access to rural and underserved regions, improve financial inclusion, encourage trust, and learn e-commerce skills. Encourage the most vulnerable people to participate in e-commerce by developing community-based delivery programs for the elderly and reserve delivery times. Protect vulnerable customers against unfair business tactics and dangerous products. Encourage the development of novel e-commerce business models while ensuring that regulatory frameworks remain adaptable enough to handle a mix of online and offline company operations. Reduce regulatory ambiguity and increase openness by sharing information. Ensure that SMEs may engage in e-commerce, for example, by providing governmental, legal, or financial incentives for sales diversification and creating a fair playing field for SMEs that rely on online platform services. Reduce bottlenecks in the enabling e-commerce environment, including connectivity, trade, logistics, and postal services. There are other instances of how governments might collaborate with online platforms to better leverage e-commerce technology in response to the COVID-19 dilemma. In the United Kingdom, for example, eBay has been collaborating with numerous government organizations to develop and test a news site with exclusive access to healthcare professionals to supply personal protection equipment to NHS primary and social care staff. Uber has teamed up with the Western Cape Department of Health and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to transport drugs to individuals most vulnerable to COVID-19 in South Africa. Furthermore, platforms like Amazon provide the public sector with free access to remote schooling, working, and research tools. The new EU rule mandates that online platform terms and conditions be written in simple and understandable English, cannot be amended without at least 15 days' notice, and thoroughly explain any grounds that might lead to the delisting of business users, among other things. According to the World Trade Organization, global trade may contract by 13 to 32%, generating new worries about e-commerce and the operation of global supply networks. That's all for now. Thank you so much for listening. Do share the episode, or tell your friends about it. In my next episode, I will discuss the importance of cybersecurity for companies in 2023. Keep listening.